Corner's Cut. I am Tabitha Lord from Book Club Babble, and I am so pleased to welcome Caroline Leavitt to tonight's show. Before we get started and I introduce her, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. First, if you are on the Zoom channel with us, you can see us, but we cannot see or hear you. So if you'd like to send a question to Caroline, hover over the bottom of your screen to the little chat feature, and you can type in a question. I will see it, and I will forward it sometime during the broadcast. We are streaming live on Facebook, hopefully, and when the broadcast is finished, we will be posting it on Book Club Babble's website and also on YouTube channels. So those are my housekeeping items. Without further ado, I would love to introduce Caroline Leavitt. She is a New York Times and USA Today bestselling author. Cruel Beautiful World is her 11th novel. She has had various titles optioned for film, and she's made numerous TV appearances herself. She teaches online writing courses at Stanford and the UCLA Extension School. She is married and has one son who is 21 years old and off in college. So, Caroline, it is my absolute pleasure to have you here tonight.
I'm thrilled. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. Thank you both so much, and thank everybody who's here or is coming here.
And they'll be logging on throughout, and I'll be able to see. And I know
we have
a couple of questions that already came to you and to me already.
Okay.
So I'll make sure I incorporate those right into our interview. So I wanted to start off with just a little bit of not super personal, but just sort of like some things I think about when I meet an author that's so accomplished. And one of the questions I had for you was, how has your experience as a writer changed from your very first book to your 11th book? And in terms of this career you've developed for yourself. So, basically, where did you start and how did you get here?
Well, I started as a little girl. I had really bad asthma as a child, and so when all the other kids were out playing, I couldn't do that. I had to stay inside a whole lot. So I stayed a lot in the library, and I read and read and read and read, and I kept asking the librarians, do you have any books about little girls who have asthma? And the librarians, of course, never did. But they bought me other books, and the more I read, the more I wanted to read and the more I wanted to write stories. So I actually started writing when I was in school, and if we had book reports to do, I would make up a book and then write a report on it. And when I got to college, I took writing courses, and I remember my writing teacher took me aside and said, you know what? You're never going to make it. You're just not good enough. He said, you just don't have what it takes. You're not going to make it. And then he invited me up to his cabin in Maine, and I said no. So I left college, and you have to have a job and to support yourself, but unfortunately every job I had was a disaster. I was fired from all of them. I was terrible at them. And what I did is I kept writing short stories and sending them out and sending them out and sending them out, and I finally published one. A little literary magazine for $50, and I thought, this is great. And then I entered this contest. It was called the Young Writers Contest, and you had to be 27 and under, and I was just 27. I thought, nothing's going to happen with it. So I wrote this story called Meeting Rosie Halfway, which was about my older sister who's kind of trouble, and it won first prize. So they flew me to New York, and all of a sudden I had an agent, and they said, this is going to be your book. And I said, I don't know how to write a novel. And they said, yes, you do. We'll help you. So my very first book was a sensation, and I was just too young and dumb to appreciate it. I was flown everywhere, reviewed everywhere. Everything was great. I had a lot of money. I had a movie deal. And I thought, it's always going to be this way. And it wasn't. It just wasn't. Books 2 through 8 were failures for one reason or another. My first publisher went out of business. So I got another 2-book deal from another publisher. And then they went out of business just as the book was coming out. So, of course, there was no publicity, nothing. So I told my agent that I wanted to go with a big publisher who was not going to go out of business.
Right.
So, and the problem with big publishers is a lot of them are what I call all or nothing. If you do well your first week out, then they support you. But if you don't, then it's bye, we have 300 other books we have to take care of. Right. So that sort of happened to me. And then I got to my 9th book, and I really felt like I'm just a failure. Nobody knows who I am. I would go to parties and people would say, well, what do you do? And I'd say, oh, I'm a writer, with a question mark in my voice. I had no sales. And I wrote this book, Pictures of You, and I showed it to my agent. And she said, oh, this is really good, and this is really different. And she sent it to my editor, and then my editor called me up a week later and said, I don't really like it. I'm not going to publish it. And I said, why not? And she said, because it's not special. I said, well, can I rewrite it? And she said, no, we here at the publishing company don't think you can do anything special at all. Okay. So I hung up the phone and I figured, that's it. That's my career. Nobody, after 9 books, no publisher is going to take a chance on you. And I just figured, well, I'll write for myself and I'll work in a cafe. I'll find something else to do. So meanwhile, while I was crying to all of my friends, one of my friends said, I know somebody at Algonquin and I bet she'd like this. And she sent her the book. And the woman, Andrea Miller from Algonquin, called me up and said, I love this. I want to buy it. And I said, are you sure? I said, because I'm telling you, I don't sell books. I have 8. She said, it doesn't matter. You'll sell it now. And she took that book and they published it, and they got it in 7 printings before it was even published. It got on the New York Times bestseller list the first month it was out. So for me, feeling successful is a really new thing. Yeah. I've done 3 books with Algonquin. I sold my 4th one to them, but I never take it for granted. I always tell everybody that writing is a long game. Mm-hmm. You're gonna have ups and downs, and the thing is, just don't quit. Don't quit.
Right. And we were talking earlier before we went live about our children who are in the arts also, and that the arts is often a game of failures. It's an industry of failure, and you really have to have this wherewithal. And I would say, wow, 8 or 9
exactly.
books of wherewithal. That's a lot of putting your heart into something and then having the world say, or a publisher, maybe not, maybe if it would have.
It seemed like the world.
It feels like the world. And to just keep persevering.
You have to persevere. And the other thing is that all this time I had other writer friends who were going on to win prizes and get huge advances. And, I was really happy for them. But there was a part of me that felt, I'll never have this. Yeah, why can't I ever have this? Yeah. And you have to just sort of believe and say, it doesn't matter. Just write and see what happens. It's the work that matters.
Yeah. And so clearly you have a discipline of writing that has served you well over the years. What are your habits like? What's a day in the life look like?
Oh, I'm totally OCD. First of all, I'm a night owl. My husband and I stay up watching movies until 2 a.m. because we're both movie holics. So I will get up. I used to sleep until noon, but now I've been setting my alarm so I get up at 10. And I will write for 4 hours. Okay. I just sit there and I do it. And some days it's easy and some days it doesn't happen. But I always tell myself, well, at least you sat there and maybe tomorrow it'll be better. Then after I do that, then usually I teach online writing classes. Mm-hmm. And then I have to do my classes, and that takes about 2 hours to check in. And then after I do that, I review books. So usually I'm working on a review, and I have to do that. Okay. And that takes another hour. And then we come up to dinner. Then I have dinner. Then I come back upstairs. And my other job that I have, which I absolutely love, is I'm a professional namer for this naming company called Eat My Words. And what I do is I name products.
Oh my God,
lipsticks.
Fantastic.
It's fantastic. It's the best job in the world. And it's so I'm always sort of really kind of crazed with a million things going on, but I like it that way.
You like it that way. I like it that way too. I like
yeah.
That's the way it should be, I feel like.
Yeah, me too. I like to be really busy and have a lot on my plate.
Right. Probably more productive the busier you are.
Yeah. If I don't have anything to do, then I'll just sit there and watch YouTube videos about baby goats or whatever.
Or whatever, right. And so my mom was here today and she knew that we were doing this interview tonight.
Oh.
Was so excited. And she said, ask her where she writes. Where's her spot in her? That's what I want to know. She's like, I want to know. Like I always
right here.
Right there in your little office. So
right here. This is my office. We bought God in 1990 when we were looking for someplace to live. We came out to Hoboken because it was like 10-minute ride into the heart of the village. And back then, nobody wanted to live there. There was nothing here. But you could buy a whole brownstone for something ridiculous, like $150,000.
Wow.
Yeah, which is really, really, I mean, they're now going for like 4 or 5 million or something. And we couldn't afford a brownstone. But we found this house, this brick house, which is 3 floors.
Wow.
And the top floor is my office is here, and my husband Jeff's office is right across the hall, so we can wave to each other. And this is where I work. This is where I work. And I love it. It's
your space.
It's my space. It's my space.
Comfy,
yeah.
Your comfy spot. Is your husband a writer as well?
He is. He's a writer and an editor. He writes about music. He wrote this great book about the 60s in music called Got a Revolution that won some prizes. He has a website online that he edits called Best Classic Bands. He writes for Carnegie Hall, which means we get a lot of free tickets, which is nice, and Playbill, which is nice. So we always say that he does mostly nonfiction, so he tells the truth and I get to
And I don't know which more fun. I don't know.
Lying.
You have a little more fun, right?
Yeah.
Although if he loves what he's doing, that's great. But I think it's good in the household if both people have that peace.
Right.
You know, because you understand one another, even if you work differently, even if you have different habits. My husband, you know, owns a business, but he's a musician. So there's a piece of him that really understands.
Absolutely.
And you can honor it in each other. And I think that, you know, it's almost necessary when you're doing this crazy creative thing, because your hours are your habits are what they are, you know, to be productive.
Yeah. And it's mostly the hours. I mean, before I was with my husband, I had boyfriends who were like, what? You're working? It's a Sunday. And I'd say, well, I have to.
Right.
You know,
there's a deadline. Or
I just have to.
Right.
Yeah, I always feel that if I didn't write, I would, you know, just go crazy. So.
Yeah. Well, let's dig into your newest book, Beautiful World, which I believe just released in paperback. Was that
in paperback? Yep.
Yeah, exciting. And so there is an interview posted online that we did, you know, via email, and it's fantastic. So viewers, you should go check it out on Book Club Babble's website. I loved this book. The first book I read of yours was must be years ago at this point, was Girls in Trouble.
Oh, right.
And when I got this one, I was like, wait, I know this author. I'm so excited. I'm like, yes, I want to take that book. And you know, so I chose it for my own personal book club's read, you know,
thank you.
Read, and I chose it for the summer read, you know, the summer feature for book.
Oh, thank you so much.
Because I thought it just had, you know, it's one of those books that from the surface, when you start it, you think, okay, maybe it's a little bit lighter. And then you get into it and you're like, wow, there's a lot.
No. Yeah.
Character study. Yeah. It reminded me, not in content, but similarly to, Leanne Moriarty's Big Little Lies. When you start reading,
thank you.
Kind of a, you know, it feels like a little bit women's fiction, you know, a little bit. But then you get in there and you're like, man, these are some deep questions. There's some deep questions in here, and I really loved that. You know, that it sort of kind of goes off and takes you in, and then it also brings you back out with hopefulness and light.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It travels a path that I thought was really meaty, and so it was a great discussion.
Thank
you.
I
had a fantastic discussion about it. And probably some of them are watching tonight, I would imagine, because they were all excited.
Hi, book club.
And so I think, you know, you answered this question in the interview, and I'm not going to repeat too many of the questions from that because
that's fine if you do.
But the inspiration for the book, actually, when I read your answer, it sort of took my breath away. And I feel like that's something that, you know, maybe just could share.
Yeah, I've actually been wanting to write this book since I was 17. When I was 17, I sat behind this girl in study hall, and we used to talk about our lives. And, you know, I kept saying, oh, I'm going to go off and be a writer and have all these boyfriends. And she was already engaged for a few years, which I thought was really weird. And what was even weirder is the guy she was engaged to was in his 30s. And I thought that was even stranger. And she would say, no, it's great. We love each other. He's a little controlling, but, you know, wouldn't hurt a fly and blah, blah, blah. And I thought, oh, okay, maybe she knows something I don't. When I got out of high school, the year I got out of high school, one of my friends called me to tell me that this girl had decided after all that she did want to go to college. marriage. And she did want to break up and see other people. And apparently her boyfriend went into the kitchen, got a butcher knife, and stabbed her to death 47 times and then vanished. So I was just so completely freaked out. I didn't know. I kept thinking, like, how do you be with somebody for all those years and then suddenly they murder you? Don't you have signs? And if you have signs, do you not see them? So I really wanted to write about it, but I didn't know how.
Right.
So then about like 10 years later, I was engaged to marry this guy, great guy, really wonderful guy, healthy, we were both young. And he dropped dead very suddenly in front of me one night, excuse me, of a heart attack. And I just fell apart. I mean, he had some glitch in his heart that nobody could have seen, nobody could have done anything about. But I fell apart and I was grieving really, really hard. And after about 4 months of grieving, I thought, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to walk in front of a bus. So I came up with a great idea that I was going to go find a new boyfriend because it would be busy work. And all my friends said, you're crazy, don't do that. That's the worst thing you can possibly do. And my grief counselor said, if you do that, I'm not going to treat you because that's the worst thing you can do. You're still grieving. Can't think of this for a couple of years. But I couldn't stand it. So back then I didn't have Match.com or, OkCupid, but there was New York Magazine. And it was very expensive, these personal ads. So most people only had 4 lines, no photos. And I met this guy and he was creative. He seemed very nice. He didn't hurt a fly. And he wanted to be with me all the time. And then after about 4 months, it started getting weird because, I was 100 pounds back then, and I wasn't eating because I was so full of grief. And he would say things like, we'd go to dinner, and he always said things in this really sweet voice, loving voice, and he'd say, oh, honey, I love you, and I love the way you look, but you know what? You would look so much better if you didn't put butter on your potato. In fact, if you didn't eat the potato, and it was always like sort of patting my hand, and I didn't know what to think about it. And he kept doing stuff like that. He would wake me up at 3 a.m. and say, marry me. And I'd say, oh, let's talk about it in the morning because I knew I wasn't going to marry him. And he wouldn't let me go to sleep until I said yes. He began monitoring my friends. He began following me in the streets. We lived in New York, to make sure I wasn't eating. And I went down to 95 pounds. My friends staged an intervention. And I thought, well, he's been telling me this so often that when I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw somebody who looked really big and somebody who did not look smart because he was always saying things to me, again, in that loving voice, I love you, honey, but you're really not that smart, are you? So you start to believe that. And the only thing that got me to leave was one day I went into my computer and I saw he had erased a whole chapter of mine and he had rewritten it with Groucho Marx jokes. And I said to him, how could you do this? And I was really upset. I said, this was mine. This is the one thing that's mine. And he got really quiet and he said, Caroline, there's no mine. There's no you. There's only us. And that was the thing where all of a sudden I was able to leave, and then I was able to understand how I could write this novel. So a lot of the novel was about that, how abuse and control isn't always physical.
Right.
It can be much more subtle and insidious. Yeah. And if you were the partner who, I don't care if if he or she is kissing you while they're saying, you're not that smart, with a smile. It's not a joke. No, not a joke. It's not a joke. And you have to put a stop to it or leave.
Yeah. Yeah. And you left, thankfully.
Yeah.
But you sent a little note in the book that you sent me, and it said, I think, stories save us.
Yes.
And, that just struck me after I read, the interview, because I really didn't know anything about your background before. And I thought, stories do, and stories connect us with others. And perhaps somebody reads that and says, I have the strength to get out, or there's a warning for me there. And the sharing of it is powerful. The sharing of it is powerful.
Yeah. And also once you release it, it's like your shame for being in that position just sort of vanishes.
Mhm.
Because, I mean, I've had women write to me or come up to me and they just say, oh, me too. I was in the same thing. I thought it was the only one. I thought there was something wrong with me. And you learn that, no, there isn't. We're all broken in some way. And there's power in speaking out and telling the truth, whatever it is.
Right. And thank you for sharing that. I was just, I know you wrote it down, so you were okay.
No, that's fine.
I feel like it was just so powerful to say that. And, to have something like that happen so young, you don't really know how to process that.
No.
When tragedy like that happens, or real violence happens at such a young age, there's a real trauma, I think, that overlays that for a very long time. And
yes.
Your own life experience sort of catches up. You can't really put it into words. So it took 11 books. It did, until I was ready. But the interesting thing is when I was ready to write it, then it just all came flooding out. So it was really interesting. So if you were to say what the central theme of this book is, and so I have a two-part question there. So basically when you start your books, do you start with a central idea you want to explore or a question you're working with? Because I know when I'm writing something, that's usually it. It's I have a question and I'm exploring it from different angles.
I'm like you.
Yeah.
I'm a writer like you. I always have a question. With Cruel, Beautiful World, it was about, I was thinking a lot in terms of, it was about the whole issue of control. How do you know when you're controlled and how can you get out of it? And if you see somebody else being controlled, and my inclination all my life has always been to be a Pollyanna and fix things for other people.
I appreciate that very much.
And I tried it. While I was writing this book, I was trying to fix somebody who I really loved, who I felt was having a really terrible time of it. And I kept seeing things that this person could do to make her life better. And the more I tried to fix her, the worse it became. And so my question was, are there some things that you can't fix? Or maybe you should just step back and let life wash over you and not fix. And I realized that was the answer. And it kind of freaked me out because as I said, I really feel like, well, I want to help everybody. And, you do that, you should do this. Or what if you do this? Or I'll come with you and we'll go talk to this person. And it's very hard to realize that sometimes people, not only do they not want your help, but you're actually making it worse for them.
Right.
And so that was Charlotte in the book. So much of that is me. And Charlotte had to learn that, she couldn't fix this.
Right. And it's, I think it's interesting too, when it's somebody you love deeply, right, it becomes even more difficult. And I remember when my oldest son, between the time he was a senior in high school and a senior in college, 4 kids in his class were killed in car accidents. That's
my God.
For a high school class in that short amount of time. And I remember going to work and talking to my colleagues because I was so rattled. One of the kids, I knew the dad. The kid had slept at my house when they were younger. I mean, it was a family I wasn't close to, but enough to know.
Right.
God, it happens, And I remember her saying that, at a certain point, as parents, we raise them, and that's partly our destiny, our karma, if you what word you want to use. But that there is a sphere of influence that we do have, and at a certain point, it's their destiny that takes over, and you have to let their destiny work it out. And that was both terrifying and liberating.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's terrifying because I don't have the control that you have when they're,
little.
You don't have control over another adult's life.
Right.
Really.
No, you don't.
But then at the same time, you can say, well, then I'm not responsible for everything either.
Right. It actually has been incredibly liberating because I feel like I'm not racing around trying to find solutions anymore.
Right.
And it sort of gives a stretch of peace between me and this other person so we can find our way back to each other.
Right. Well, one of the things I love about your books, and I remember it from the first one that I read, but is your character development. The characters are your characters are people that you get to deeply invest in, follow them, through their ups and their downs. And, and so for our audience who maybe haven't read the book yet, can you just maybe talk a little bit about the Lucy-Charlotte dynamic?
Yes. Lucy and Charlotte are sisters, and they're growing up in 1969 and 1970, which is a really interesting time because in 1969, it was still very much flower children. Everybody thought they were going to change the world and peace and love and all that. And then once it hit the 70s, everything just changed and things became really ugly. Suddenly there was violent protests, not peaceful protests. People blew up buildings. Somebody I went to college with actually robbed a bank for the revolution and killed somebody and went underground for years and years. People were dying of drugs. So I wanted to set the two girls in that period, and I wanted almost one of them to be 1969, and Charlotte was more 1970. Lucy is this very wild, gullible flower child. And back in 1969, there were all these back to the land paradises that were supposedly springing up where you could, Mother Earth and live on the land and be in a commune. It was like communal living. And for Lucy, that was something that was very appealing. She was going to be a writer, and no one was going to tell her what not to do, and she was going to run away. And her feeling for her sister were that, my older sister Charlotte is so boring. She doesn't understand what I'm doing, and she sticks by all the rules, and she makes lists, and I'm going to be different, and my life is going to be spectacular. Whereas Charlotte, who's older and more, she worries a lot and she writes lists and she always tries to fix everything, is more thinking in terms of, well, I have to make sure that Lucy, my sister, is okay. And I have to make sure that Iris, my mom, is okay. And I'm the one who has to take care of everybody before I take care of me. So I thought that was kind of an interesting dynamic because it led for me into the question of how do we care for the people we love? I mean, how much is too much and how little is too little, and what exactly is your responsibility to them, and what's your responsibility to yourself? And I wanted to play off that, these two very different sisters who really, really love each other. And that to me was sort of the glue that made it interesting, that there was so much love between them.
There was, and you could just feel Charlotte's angst when her sister went missing, when she went away.
She wanted to fix it.
She wanted to fix it. Yeah, she wanted to fix it. And so again, for our viewers, so Lucy, the younger sister, and this isn't really a spoiler, this is what happens pretty quickly, runs off with her high school English teacher. And that's sort of like the catalyst for Charlotte going to look for her and this sort of thing. And I thought another really fabulous character dynamic, we touched a little bit on this in the written interview, that you set up was the William and Patrick. So William is the English teacher who really does this, unethical, immoral, thing by running off with his student. Even though it's set in it's sort of set in a time period where there's a bit of
there's leeway.
There's a little leeway there. Yeah. Yet when you put Patrick in the mix and he behaves like an adult, in his relationship with Lucy, it really made the contrast very clear. And I thought that was a brilliant use of character, to kind of make your point. So Patrick, can you talk a little bit about Patrick?
Yeah. Well, William is he's 30 years old, but he's still very much a child. He's his mother's child, and there's some question whether there is or isn't something wrong with him. But the thing about William that I was really conscious of is that I wanted him to truly believe that he was trying to be a good man. That he was trying to do his best, that he was going to take care of Lucy. He just didn't know how to do it. He was clueless. So he does not behave like an adult, like a grown man. So it was important to me that Lucy sees Patrick the way she sees William, that, here's another grown man and he's going to take care of me, or he'll fall in love with me, or whatever else she's thinking. And Patrick does not. Patrick is the one who stands up and says, no, you can't. If you're tired, you can't sneak in. You can take a nap on the couch, but you cannot take a nap with me. It's wrong. And he tells her exactly what she has to do. And he's very, very responsible. And you're right. He was the adult, even though he's younger than William. Or maybe he wasn't. I forget. I'm always bad with age.
I have to look up their names again. Wait a minute. What did I do? Okay. And so the other character that I thought was wonderful was Iris. And I loved that we had this older person's story, and her story arc is really, becomes really integral, and you as invested in her as you are in the girls. And so Iris is the caretaker, and she is related, and more about that comes up. but she, kind of inherits these girls when they lose
Right.
their parents at a young age and raises them, but she's much older and she's had a whole
Right.
life behind her. And then she ends up having some surprise life,
Yes.
which I thought was just really wonderful. And so so I guess my question, you can talk a little bit about, take Iris anywhere you want to take her in your answer, but did you always know that Iris, was she well developed when you started the story, or did she sort of tell her story as you went along?
Well, when I first started the novel, all I knew was that it was going to be about first love, last love, and dangerous love. Mm-hmm. So I had no idea. I mean, the story went through a whole lot of different permutations. And then when I created Iris, when I first created her, she wasn't that nice. She was kind of resentful of having these two little girls. She had an awful marriage, and her husband died, and she hated men. And my editor said, Caroline, you have to find the love between these people. So I sat down, I thought, oh, great, okay. And I went back and I started realizing, you know what, I can make Iris this woman who always wanted to be in love, and it always escaped her. Her first marriage was a good marriage, but there was something in it that wasn't totally satisfying. And, and then as she got older, when she thought her life was over, she comes to realize that it's not. Right. And a lot of Iris is actually based on my mom, who was more that, my mother had a terrible marriage. My father died when he was 50, and my mother never wanted to date anybody because she just didn't like men. And I sort of wrote Iris as a love letter to my mom, mm-hmm. because and the unfortunate thing is that my mom now has dementia, so she can't read it. And I can tell her the story, but she forgets it soon afterwards. But still, it felt important to me to be able to show that you could be an older woman and amazing, unexpected, incredible things could still happen to you.
That was such a lovely piece of the story. I really I was so delighted by it and surprised because, I really didn't know it coming, but it was delightful. And there was so much darkness in the book.
Yeah, I had to balance it out.
There was so much darkness. And it wasn't all, even the Lucy Charlotte storyline had light to it, with Charlotte and her, growth and everything. But I thought this was really special. So
I loved that story too.
My book group girls thought so too.
Oh, good. I'm so glad.
They did. So you mentioned permutations of the story. So just from a craft and writer perspective, the pros can't escape it. The novice writers can't escape it.
Right.
Right. And you have to go through many drafts. So
yes.
How long do you usually, are any of the books, is there a pattern for you that you say, all right, I know I'm going to have to rewrite it 3 times, or I know I'm going to have to rewrite it
more than 3 times. I spend the first 6 months just writing out what I call a writer's synopsis, where it's like 20 pages. And that I must rewrite, no kidding, 18 to 20 times.
Oh my gosh.
I think about it. I have, readers and other writers that I show it to and say, what do you think of this? And everybody has an opinion. Yeah. And then I go back and I think about it again, and you sort of feel your way into the story and try to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And then once that part's over, you would think that I would say, oh, well, I have the whole story. It's going to go great now, but no, it's not that way. It's because it just, as I rewrite, I think Cruel Beautiful World had like 18 drafts of the synopsis. I rewrote the book at least 10 times before I gave it to my agent, who made me rewrite it again one more time. And then I gave it to my editor. She had me rewrite it about 4 times. But the thing is, as you rewrite, you see it getting better, so you don't mind.
Right.
That's the thing. That's part of the deal. Nobody just spews out a book and that's it. That's kind of the myth.
Absolutely.
Of being a writer.
Yeah, I know. And
I
think it's a shocking thing, that you sort of say, well, I got the book out. And then you're like, wait a minute. Now I have to rip it apart and put it back together again. Is there ever a scary moment for you? Or is there always a scary moment for you where you're like, wait, I don't know how to reassemble it?
Yes, always, all the time. I cry, I carry on, I panic. I call writer friends and say, I can't do this. I just can't do this. It's too much for me. But there's this quote that I love that John Irving said that explains the writing process, which is, it's right here on the side of my desk. if you don't feel you are possibly on the edge of humiliating yourself or losing control of the whole novel, then what you're doing isn't very vital. If you don't feel that you're writing over your head, why do it? You should always have doubt of your authority to tell your story. And I loved that. I love that so much. I tracked him down and I wrote him a letter. And he actually wrote me back this beautiful handwritten letter. And in the handwritten letter, he said, I don't ever remember saying that. But he said, but it sounds like something I would say. But I think it's true. That's the way it is as a writer. You know that. You always feel, this is terrible. And what am I doing? And can I pull it off?
And you don't know that that's
right.
normal, I mean,
it's
especially
normal.
the first time you experience it, you kind of say, wait, what?
Right.
Take the whole thing apart and, you get the editorial document back with, one nice line and then red ink, but at least you have the bones. That's what I'm.
At least you have the bones. You're right. You're right.
And
that's a really smart way of telling it, of saying that's the bones of the book. And once you have that, then it's almost like you can't stop because you have the bones.
And you're not going to give up on the story.
Right.
So have you ever wanted to take a book past, I don't think any of yours are sequels, are they?
No.
They're all
no, I haven't, because usually what happens is that I'm the kind of person where I have to have, like you, I have to have work all the time. So when I'm about 3/4 of the way through, I start thinking about, well, what's the next book that I want to write? Mm-hmm. So, and I do that for 2 reasons. One, because I don't want to be stuck in the past book and worrying over it. I want to be worrying over something new, so I'm not obsessing about sales and whatever else. And also because I feel that, I took the characters as far as I could take them. I hope they're okay, in their world. I trust they're okay and they're not, too angry with me or whatever. But no, I think it would be too hard for me to do that.
Yeah, nope, that's. Yeah.
Do you do that?
Well, I'm writing a series.
Oh, you're writing a series.
Okay. And it started as a standalone. Then I realized very quickly it was too much for one book. And it's science fiction, space opera. So
right.
Epic. And then I stopped what I was doing and I outlined the other two.
That's so hard.
And then came back. It was a challenge, but so. Speaking of what's next for you? I have an idea. So I want you to share.
Well, a few things. I wrote the first 70 pages of a new novel, which I don't really have a title for. I gave it to my agent who really liked it, and she gave it to Algonquin, and they bought it. So now I have to write it, which is its own kind of sheer terror because I cannot write it because I saved it, but I don't really know how to write it. So
there's that moment right there.
There's that moment right there. I feel like it's a really different book for me, and I feel like I'm writing way over my head. I don't have control yet of the subject matter. It's about a lot of different things. It's about personality, and it's about aging. It's about rock and roll. It's about comas. It's about all these science and spirituality, and I feel like, what was I thinking? But I can't stop writing it, so we'll see.
So how far along are you with it?
I have I'm on chapter 7.
Editor, so you can say.
Oh no, I have until December 2018. So I have okay, and they'll give me more time if I need it. I have about 8 chapters, and I feel like it's about halfway through.
Okay, that's a good.
So that's okay. So when you're halfway through, then you really can't give up. You're screwed if you do that. So.
Yeah, totally. So talk a little bit about your teaching and the online. What is it that you do for the? I teach
online at Stanford and UCLA Extension Writers Program, and I work with private clients, and I teach them about story structure. Like how you build characters, how you do reversals, reveals, moral choices. And it's something that I love to do for 2 reasons. First, because I get to fix things. I get to help other writers and see what's working and help them, and I love that. But also, I found that the more I'm able to look at somebody's work and say, oh, this isn't working, why not? And to figure it out, the more I can do it with my own work. So it's really, really satisfying. And it's also kind of amazing because some of my students have gone on to great success. I mean, I had this one student, Gina Sorrell, who she turned in the first page of Mothers and Other Strangers in my class. I think it was like 5 years ago, and I went nuts. And I called her up and said, listen, you're the real deal. I want to work with you when you're done with this novel. And she said, okay. And so we worked together and we became friends. And then then she started critiquing my work, and she's a great editor, and her book came out. It's getting all kinds of accolades and awards, and it's selling like hotcakes. And we just wrote a pilot together, and we have an agent. So who likes it? So we'll see. I mean, you know, Hollywood, nothing ever happens, but it's still fun. It's fun to pretend.
And it energizes you for the next thing. And
but it all came from somebody who was brave enough to come to a class,
right,
you know, and submit writing to be looked at.
Yeah, which is a daunting
thing. Wonderful. Yeah,
but it's
wonderful.
Well, Caroline, this has been a wonderful evening. Thank you so much. Do you have anything that you want to share before we sign off this evening for your fans?
Yes, I want to tell everybody, if it doesn't matter if you're a writer, if you're a reader, or in whatever you do, never, ever, ever, ever give up. Just because, I don't care if 1,000 people tell you no, that does not necessarily mean no. There's this Chinese proverb that says something like, never say no, you can't do that, to the person who's going ahead and doing it anyway. You have to just believe in yourself, speak your truth, realize that we're all sort of broken, and it's our job here on earth to help each other heal. And thank you all for being here. And I loved this interview. I love your sunflowers.
Where do you? My spot right here.
Where do you? Are you on the East Coast?
I am on the East Coast in Rhode Island.
Oh, you're Rhode Island. So you're pretty close. So you know,
too.
When you're in the New York City area, call me up and we'll have coffee.
Absolutely. Actually, I'll be there in a couple weeks. This is a local painter actually who did that. So
I love it.
In the area, and I bought it at the Wickford Art Festival about 5 years ago, and it sits back there. And now I'm like, well, this is my spot. The lighting is right, the picture is right. I can't go anywhere else. So.
It's beautiful. I love it. I love it, love it, love it.
It was an absolute pleasure to speak with you. And
it was my pleasure.
Go out and read this book, and then go to all of your backlist stories and read those. And I can't wait to read the new one when you finally. 2018 sometime.
We'll switch books. We'll swap books. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody who's out there who I can't see.
Fantastic.
Okay, should I just